Chapter 5 Betrayal. Rain hammered against the abandoned warehouse windows, creating a constant drumbeat that masked the sounds of movement inside. Barrett secured the perimeter methodically, checking the makeshift alarm system they'd rigged from scavenged electronics. His fingers, 3 flesh and 2 synthetic, worked with practiced efficiency despite the fatigue clouding his mind after 72 hours without real sleep. 5 Redeemers huddled in the center of the cavernous space, their ancient eyes carrying the haunted look of souls who had spent millennia in torment. They communicated mostly in gestures and whispers. Barrett noted how they always maintained physical contact with one another, a shoulder touch, clasped hands, as if afraid separation might somehow return them to the hell they'd escaped. Dozens of other returnees slept on makeshift bedding arranged in concentric rings around the Redeemers, a protective formation that had emerged organically. Their bodies were healed, but their minds remained fractured from their time in hell. Some woke screaming every 20 minutes, others hadn't spoken since their return, their eyes tracking movements with the wary alertness of prey animals. Barrett paused at the eastern window, watching rain stream down cracked glass. The warehouse had once been a pharmaceutical distribution center before the resource wars. Its thick concrete walls and remote location made it ideal for their purposes, hiding those Reed had ordered eliminated. Wayland approached, her military bearing intact despite the civilian clothes they'd acquired from a sympathetic supply officer. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, the only concession to her former appearance as Reed's top general. Northeast checkpoint just confirmed another extraction successful, she said, her voice low enough that only Barrett could hear. 2 more Redeemers recovered before Reed's cleanup crews could reach them. Barrett nodded, studying the tactical map they'd marked with Reed's known extermination squad deployments. Red pins showed confirmed kill sites, blue marked successful extractions, yellow indicated potential Redeemer locations they hadn't yet reached. "We've got maybe 12 hours before they identify this location," he said, tracing the pattern of Reed's search grid. "Transport ready for evacuation?" Fueled and waiting. Wayland's eyes drifted to Nyara, the ancient Redeemer who sat cross-legged in silent communion with the others. Even among the extraordinary, Nyara stood out. Her presence carried a gravity that seemed to bend attention toward her naturally. "She's the key, 100,000 years of knowledge about the system, about Eve's weaknesses." "And the old ways," Barrett added quietly, watching the returnees turn towards Nyara, like iron filings to a magnet. A crash from outside sent them both reaching for weapons with synchronized precision. Barrett signaled for silence, moving toward the surveillance feed they'd jury-rigged from cameras salvaged from abandoned security systems. His shoulders relaxed fractionally as he recognized the approaching figures on the grainy monitor. "Persephone team," he confirmed, referencing the extraction unit led by his former Special Forces colleague. "They've got wounded." The warehouse's side door slid open just enough to admit 3 figures, supporting a 4th between them, a man whose leg hung at an unnatural angle, face contorted in pain but refusing to cry out. Barrett helped lower him to a makeshift medical station, while Wayland secured the entrance, checking for potential surveillance before reactivating the alarm system. "Reed's forces hit the Alexandria safe house," reported Torres, the team leader. His face was streaked with blood and grime, the former Navy SEAL's usual precision replaced by exhausted urgency. Barrett had recruited Torres personally 3 days ago, after the man had witnessed his own brother materialize naked and weeping in the middle of a military briefing, a brother executed 5 years earlier for suspected insurrection. "They're shooting on sight now," Torres continued, wiping blood from a cut above his eye. No attempts to contain or question, just immediate elimination. He's getting desperate, Wayland said, checking the wounded man's injuries with the efficiency of someone who'd seen battlefield trauma throughout her military career. The narrative is collapsing faster than he can control it. It's worse than that, Torres continued, handing Barrett a ruggedized tablet with security footage. They're specifically targeting anyone showing signs of Redeemer abilities. They've got some kind of detection device, identifies the neural patterns associated with portal creation. 5 potential Redeemers executed in Georgetown before we could extract them. Barrett studied the footage, jaw tightening at the clinical efficiency of the executions. Presidential forces moved through an apartment complex with specialized equipment, handheld scanners that beeped and flashed near certain individuals before the soldiers executed them with precise headshots. Gray's technology, Barrett said, recognizing the distinctive housing of the devices. They're using his research against us. Gray wouldn't, Wayland began, her voice carrying a defensive edge. Since her return from hell, she'd developed an unexpected loyalty to the scientist who had helped understand what had happened to her. Not willingly, Barrett cut her off, handing the tablet back to Torres, but Reed has ways of extracting cooperation. He turned away, unwilling to voice his darkest fear, that Gray had already been taken, that the president's interrogation specialists were already working to extract everything the scientist knew about Redeemers, about the resistance network, about this very safe house. Get our wounded stabilized, he instructed Torres. Then prep for possible evacuation. I want everyone ready to move on 15 minutes' notice. As Torres nodded and moved toward the medical station, Barrett caught Wayland's eye. The unspoken question passed between them with the clarity of shared combat experience. How much time did they really have? In the presidential bunker's surveillance center, Reed watched the live feed from Dr. Gray's laboratory with cold detachment. The room's blue-tinted monitors cast harsh shadows across his face, highlighting the new lines that had formed around his mouth in recent days. Armed personnel surrounded the scientist, who stood with hands raised, blood trickling from a split lip, where one of the soldiers had struck him during the initial detention. "Mr. President," Gray said, his scientific detachment slipping as another soldier roughly disconnected equipment from his primary research terminal. "This approach seems unnecessarily—" "Secure him!" Reed ordered through the comm system, his voice carrying the precise cadence that had become his signature during wartime broadcasts. The soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, restraining Gray's hands behind his back with reinforced zip ties. "Bring him to me, directly." Reed switched to another feed, showing soldiers carefully packing Gray's neural scanning equipment. In the days after Aria disappeared, Gray had cobbled together a device to try to locate her based on energy signatures he'd recorded when she was in his laboratory. The prototype could detect the unique brain patterns associated with Redeemer abilities, a tool Gray had created out of desperate hope to find the girl. Reed had confiscated an early version after the incident in the lab, immediately recognizing its tactical potential. Meanwhile, Gray had continued refining the technology, creating a more powerful device for his own search efforts, a device that now would serve Reed's purposes instead. He turned to Colonel Mercer, who stood at rigid attention beside him. Mercer's face remained impassive, though Reed noted the slight tightening around his eyes, the only visible sign of the man's discomfort with recent orders. "The safe house location?" Reed asked, his voice deliberately casual despite the rage simmering beneath his controlled exterior. Gray's betrayal had struck something personal. The scientist had been one of the few Reed considered intellectually equal, someone whose vision matched his own in its clarity and scope. "Confirmed, sir," Mercer replied, displaying satellite imagery on the main screen. Thermal signatures indicate approximately 50 individuals, including the high-value targets. The display showed heat patterns within the warehouse structure, bodies clustered in distinct formations that confirmed intelligence reports. Barrett and Wayland had gathered not just returned souls, but specifically those with potential Redeemer abilities, a direct threat to Reed's attempts to contain the metaphysical disruption threatening his authority. Reed studied the layout, his finger tracing the perimeter with the methodical precision that had characterized his military campaigns during the resource wars. "No survivors, Colonel. I want this contamination contained permanently." "Sir," Mercer hesitated, a rare break in his otherwise flawless military bearing. "General Wayland is—" "A traitor," Reed finished, his voice flat with finality. "She died in the line of duty. What returned wearing her face is not the general who served this administration." His eyes hardened as he turned to face Mercer directly. "The same applies to anyone else betraying command protocols during this crisis." The warning wasn't subtle. Mercer had served with Wayland for 15 years, had been her protégé before rising to his current position. Reed wanted no confusion about where loyalties must remain, regardless of personal history. Mercer nodded stiffly. "Understood, sir. Elimination parameters authorized." As Mercer departed to organize the strike team, Reed considered the confrontation to come. It surprised him how much Gray's betrayal had hurt him. The doctor had been subtly feeding information to Barrett and Wayland for days, helping them identify and extract Redeemers before Reed's forces could eliminate them. Using the President's own resources to undermine his control. Reed had discovered the betrayal through an intercepted communication, a careless encrypted message about safe locations that his cybersecurity team had decoded. The man whose scientific genius Reed had rewarded with unprecedented research freedom had turned against him when it mattered most. Reed checked his watch. In 20 minutes, Gray would stand before him, forced to confront and suffer the consequences of his actions. In 30, Mercer's strike team would eliminate the Redeemer Sanctuary. And by morning, Reed would restore order through the only means he truly understood: overwhelming, decisive force. The strike team approached the warehouse with practiced silence, thermal imaging guiding their positions through the pounding rain. 16 operators in total, each moving with the synchronized precision that marked Reed's elite forces. Colonel Mercer knelt behind an abandoned delivery truck, rain streaming down his tactical gear as he studied the building's layout one final time through enhanced optics. The warehouse stood dark against the night sky, its windows blacked out, only the faintest heat signatures visible through thermal imaging. He memorized exit points and blind spots, calculating breach angles with cold efficiency. As lightning flashed, Mercer found himself anticipating the moment he would face Barrett again. The last time they'd been this close, Mercer had orchestrated the accident. He flexed his own hand, remembering the satisfying crunch as the armored vehicle door had closed on Barrett's fingers. The man's screams had been surprisingly controlled. No begging, no pleading. Just the white-hot focus of someone memorizing his tormentor's face. Tonight would finish what he'd started then. No more Barrett, no more Wayland, no more inconvenient metaphysical threats to Reed's authority. Just clean, final solutions to messy problems. "All units in position," his second-in-command confirmed through the tactical comm unit. Mercer nodded, readying the breach signal. "On my mark," he said, raising his hand as his team tensed for action. 3, 2, 1. Arya traced a finger not through dust, but through light itself. The schematic hovered before her, a luminous ghost of molecular structure, expanding into a three-dimensional lattice that rotated with the barest whisper of her thought. Quantum entanglement patterns, Dr. Rogers called them. The supposed seams between realities, the universe's hidden stitching. She turned from the schematic, the elegant visualization feeling like a mockery. You see the fault lines. Why can't you apply force? Simulate my energy signature. Make your own tear. Roger's expression softened into that familiar mask of practiced patience, the look of a being explaining astrophysics to an ant. The substrate is different here, Arya. Reward is crystalline, ordered, the energy required to fracture it from within. She shook her head. The system architecture resists it. We've theorized for millennia, run countless simulations. The boundaries hold firm from this side. Frustration coiled tight in Arya's chest. She turned away, drawn to the panoramic window, a seamless curve of crystal overlooking the city. It wasn't built, it bloomed. Towers spiraled like iridescent fungi reaching for the three suns. Perfect, static pearls casting an unchanging, shadowless golden hour light. It was breathtaking, it was sterile, it was a cage sculpted from light and unbearable peace. In a public square visible below, figures gathered. A vast kinetic sculpture materialized at the square's center. Light, sound, and something that felt like pure emotion woven into shifting, abstract forms. It responded to the collective, silent appreciation of the observers, evolving, complexifying, a collaborative masterpiece born of shared, serene thought. Art as consensus, beauty as algorithm. Perhaps a walk, Rogers suggested, her voice gentle, coaxing. The creation gardens often provide clarity. Clarity wasn't the issue. Impotence was. But Arya nodded mutely, following Rogers onto a waiting platform. It responded instantly to Rogers's unspoken intent, gliding smoothly away from the research complex, merging seamlessly into the silent, three-dimensional traffic flow. Arya gripped the railing, a barely visible energy field that hummed faintly against her palm, the effortless movement still unsettling. The gardens allow residents to explore the direct interface between consciousness and matter, Rogers offered, directing the platform towards a structure resembling a colossal, multifaceted diamond refracting the light of the three suns. Thought made tangible, many find the process centering. Centering, Arya echoed, the word tasting like ash. Samuel was suffering, transforming, losing himself, while residents here centered themselves by sculpting light. The platform docked silently. The interior of the gardens was vast, reality fluid. Landscapes bled into one another, an alpine meadow shimmering beside a volcanic field of obsidian flowers, a phosphorescent jungle giving way to a zero-gravity nebula filled with floating, crystalline life forms. Residents moved through these shifting dreamscapes, shaping them with focused will. A figure with skin like polished ebony stood waist-deep in a river of molten gold, conducting its flow into soaring, ephemeral arches that solidified and dissolved in time with unheard music. Nearby, another being sculpted creatures from pure sound, iridescent serpents that coiled through the air, leaving trails of resonant harmony, winged beasts whose cries were complex chords that shifted the ambient light. It was creation, untethered from consequence, from limitation, from the messy struggle of physical reality. Arya felt a profound, visceral alienation. This wasn't life as she understood it. It was performance, endless, effortless, beautiful, and utterly meaningless. Do they ever recreate hardship? She asked suddenly, the question surprising even herself. Struggle? Loss? Rogers paused, observing a being weaving a tapestry from captured starlight. Negative emotional states are generally considered counter-evolutionary here, Arya. Why replicate suffering when the goal is transcendence beyond it? Because it's real, Arya snapped, turning to face the ancient scientist, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. Because love doesn't mean anything without the fear of loss, because courage is meaningless without danger. Don't you miss it? Any of it. A shadow passed through her ancient eyes, a memory of a reality perhaps long discarded. We remember, she said softly. The intensity of the living realm, the crucible of correction, they shape us. But the purpose here is to move beyond that cycle, to build, to understand, to become. Become what? Arya wanted to scream, perfectly serene, emotionally neutered architects of light sculptures. I don't want to move beyond, Arya said coldly. Arya, as we've touched upon before, the collective offers a path for many, sharing consciousness, distributing emotional load. I know, Arya interrupted, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Sophia explained it. Dissolve my grief into the group mind. Contextualize it until it loses its meaning. She shook her head fiercely. It is not erasure, Arya, but integration, Rogers countered gently, though a hint of weariness entered her eyes. Understanding your pain within the vast scope of millennia of conscious experience can bring perspective, not diminish the love. Perspective doesn't get him out, Arya retorted flatly. What else? The recalibration? She gestured towards the distant crystalline pods she'd been shown before, pulsing with soft, internal light. Chemical peace? Numb the connection so I can sculpt light without worrying about him? It is always a choice, Rogers repeated, the phrase starting to sound like a mantra. Tools to assist integration. Neurochemical recalibration can soften the edges of traumatic memory. Help align emotional responses with the prevailing harmony. Dulling the pain, filing down the love until it fit neatly into their serene consensus. Arya felt a surge of revulsion. So those are my choices? Surrender my individuality to your collective, or have my brain rewired to stop caring? Rogers sighed, a sound like dust settling in ancient ruins. There is also the path of contribution, Arya. Honoring loved ones through creative work, advancing knowledge. To the great project, Arya finished bitterly. Pushing technology forward, expanding understanding, reaching for some undefined transcendence, while people suffer now. She turned to face Rogers directly. To what end? What's it all for? The question hung between them, substantive in a way that felt almost out of place in this realm of ephemeral perfection. That, Rogers admitted softly, is what we are all trying to discover. The purpose behind the system, the meaning behind the three realms, the reason consciousness persists. Their conversation was interrupted by the silent arrival of another platform carrying a small group of newcomers, their faces alight with the initial wonder Arya dimly remembered feeling herself before the gilded cage began to close in. I should return to my research, Arya said, needing escape from this conversation, from this place. Rogers didn't try to stop her. Continue your research. Access is unrestricted. Perhaps you will see something we have missed. The faint hope in her voice sounded less like scientific optimism and more like the weary resignation of eternity. Arya watched her go, then turned back to the shifting landscapes of the creation gardens. The effortless beauty felt suffocating now, the serene creators like ghosts haunting a perfect empty stage. She felt utterly, terrifyingly alone, adrift in an ocean of placid acceptance. She found an unoccupied platform, directing it towards her assigned living space with a surge of focused intent. The city flowed beneath her, a silent, intricate machine, humming with purpose she couldn't comprehend, couldn't accept. The residents moved through their perfect lives, their faces smooth, untroubled, their existence a stark contrast to the brutal reality grinding Samuel down in correction. Were they even aware of the cost of their paradise? Did they care? Her quarters sensed her approach, the entrance dilating like a pupil. The minimalist space felt colder, emptier than before. A synthesized meal sat untouched on the surface that served as a table, radiating faint warmth, perfectly calibrated for her nutritional needs. She ignored it, moving directly to the workstation. The holographic model of quantum boundaries sprang to life, complex, elegant, infuriatingly stable. She collapsed into the chair, which instantly molded itself to her form, offering comfort she didn't want. Closing her eyes, she pictured Samuel's face. A gentle chime sounded, the polite, almost apologetic tone of a visitor request. An intrusion she hadn't anticipated, hadn't authorized. Frowning, Arya focused her thought, bringing up the notification. Visitor requesting entrance. Identity, Caitlin. The name sparked no recognition. Who would seek her out here now, bypassing the usual channels? Curiosity warred with exhaustion and a prickle of suspicion. Was this another attempt at gentle guidance? Another offer of perspective? Still, a deviation from the routine was almost welcome. With a weary mental nod, she authorized entry. The entrance dilated smoothly. The woman who stood there was different. Auburn hair framed a face that was undeniably alive, intelligent, but carried none of the ageless serenity Arya had come to expect. Her eyes, sharp, green, and startlingly direct, assessed Arya not with placid acceptance, but with a focused intensity that felt jarringly familiar, an echo of the desperate drive Arya felt within herself. Her simple tunic, unlike the flowing garments of most residents, seemed functional rather than decorative. She projected an energy that was grounded, purposeful, entirely out of sync with the ephemeral perfection of the reward realm. "I hope I'm not intruding," the woman said, her voice clear, direct, lacking the usual melodic cadence. She remained respectfully at the threshold. "I saw your research access requests in the system logs. Impressive queries. You're digging deeper than most newcomers. I wanted to speak with you privately, away from observation." Arya studied her, intrigued despite her weariness. This woman felt real in a way Rogers and Sophia did not. "And you are?" The woman stepped forward, extending a hand, a gesture so startlingly, anachronistically human in this realm of thought interfaces and energy fields that Arya almost hesitated before taking it. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Arya," the woman said, her green eyes holding Arya's gaze with unwavering intensity. "My name is Caitlin. I believe you knew my husband, Barrett." Reed stood at the window of the presidential office, watching rain streak the bulletproof glass. The city beyond looked like a watercolor painting melting in tears, streetlights blurred into amber smears, the monuments mere suggestions of white against the darkness. His reflection stared back at him, hollow-eyed and haunted. Dr. Gray would arrive soon enough. The scientist who had betrayed him, who had used Reed's resources to undermine his authority, who had helped build a network of resistance when order was collapsing around them. Gray would answer for that betrayal face to face. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Not the sharp military rap of his security detail delivering Gray, but something gentler, something familiar. "Come in," he called, already knowing who stood beyond the door. Julia entered, closing the door quietly behind her. She wore a simple grey dress that complemented her silver-streaked hair. The sight of her still created a physical ache in his chest, a mingling of disbelief and desperate gratitude that he suspected would never fully fade. "You're working late," she said, moving toward him with the fluid grace that had first captivated him decades ago. Her eyes took in the presidential seal, the leather-bound reports, the scattered tablets displaying security feeds. Or perhaps early might be more accurate. Reed managed a tired smile. Time has become fluid recently. He crossed the room to meet her, drawn by a gravitational pull that transcended conscious thought. "I didn't expect to see you again tonight." She reached for his hand, her touch sending electricity through nerve endings he'd believed long deadened by power and responsibility. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Too many thoughts. Too many—" She hesitated, searching for words. "Adjustments." Reed understood. How could he not? In the space of days, she had traversed realms, had returned from torment to find the world, and him, fundamentally altered. The cognitive dissonance must be overwhelming. "You should rest," he said gently, leading her to the small sitting area where they had spent countless evenings during their rise to power, strategizing over Russian tea and classified reports. "Tomorrow will bring fresh challenges." Julia smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. "Tomorrow always does," she replied, settling onto the leather sofa with a small sigh. "But I wanted to see you first. To talk away from advisors and security details and the constant political calculations." Her hand remained in his, thumb tracing small circles against his palm. "Just us, Elias." Like before. "I have about 15 minutes, he said, checking his watch. "A security briefing I can't postpone." The lie came easily, practiced over years of compartmentalized leadership. She didn't need to know about Gray, about Mercer's strike team, about the systematic elimination of Redeemers. Not yet, not until he had restored order. Julia nodded, accepting the explanation without question. 15 minutes with you is better than hours with anyone else, she said, her voice carrying a wistful quality that tugged at something buried beneath his presidential persona. She gestured toward the antique cabinet near his desk. "Perhaps we could have a drink first? Like we used to?" Reed hesitated. He had a strict rule about alcohol during crises, a lesson learned during the resource wars when momentary impairment had cost lives. But Julia's request carried the weight of ritual, of reconnection. "One small one," he conceded, moving to the cabinet. Whiskey had been their shared vice, a private tradition during happier times. He selected the crystal decanter, reaching for the glasses they had used throughout their marriage, wedding gifts from a diplomat whose name he could no longer recall. "Allow me," Julia said, rising to join him. "You look exhausted, Elias." Her fingers brushed his as she took the decanter, the contact sending another jolt through his system. "Sit. Let me take care of you for a moment." Reed acquiesced, settling into his chair with a bone-deep weariness he rarely permitted himself to acknowledge. The events of the past 2 weeks had strained even his formidable reserves. The metaphysical rupture, the returned souls, the collapse of certainty about death itself. And now Julia, impossibly restored to him yet somehow altered in ways he was still trying to understand. She poured the amber liquid with practiced precision, her movements gracefully economical. Reed watched her hands, the same hands he had held during campaign speeches, during military briefings, during their final moments together before the assassin's bullet had torn her from him. Now they moved in his office as if the intervening years had never happened, as if death itself had been merely an inconvenience rather than the absolute he had believed it to be. "To second chances?" she said, handing him his glass, keeping one for herself. The whiskey caught the light, glowing like liquid topaz. However improbable. Reed raised his glass, studying her face over the rim. "To you," he amended softly. "To having you back, the one thing I never dared hope for." Something flickered across Julia's features, pain perhaps, or resolve, before she smiled and clinked her glass against his. She took a delicate sip, watching him over the rim. Reed drank deeply, a familiar burn tracing a warm path down his throat. He savoured it, this small return to normalcy, amidst the metaphysical chaos that threatened to unravel everything he had built. "The city's in turmoil," Julia observed, setting her barely touched glass aside. Her gaze drifted towards the window, a shadow crossing her features. All those souls returning, pulled back from that place. She studied his face with the analytical precision that had made her such a formidable political partner. "How are you addressing it, Elias?" Reed chose his words carefully, conscious of the growing distance between them since her return, the subtle shifts in her responses to his explanations, the quiet assessment behind her questions. "Containment first," he said, the practiced lines coming easily. "The public isn't prepared for a metaphysical revelation of this magnitude. Widespread panic would only compound the crisis." He took another sip, the whiskey's warmth spreading through his system. "We're providing medical assistance, temporary housing, psychological support for the returnees, while developing a more permanent integration strategy." The half-truth hung between them. He had omitted the execution squads, the classification of returnees as threats to national security, the systematic elimination of potential redeemers. Necessary measures to maintain order, to preserve the system they had built together. She would understand eventually once the crisis was managed. Julia nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. "And the redeemers?" Reed felt a momentary disorientation, a slight blurring at the edges of his vision, a subtle heaviness in his limbs that seemed disproportionate to the single drink. He blinked, forcing clarity. "We're studying the phenomenon," he said, each word requiring slightly more effort than the last. "Gray's team is developing protocols for identification and containment." "Containment?" Julia repeated softly. She moved closer, perching on the edge of his desk, her proximity both comforting and suddenly inexplicably alarming. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Something was wrong. Reed felt it in the growing numbness spreading through his extremities, in the slight disconnect between his thoughts and his ability to articulate them. He tried to stand, to reach for the security call button, but his limbs refused to cooperate. "What have you—" he began, the words slurring slightly, despite his desperate attempt at control. "I'm sorry, Elias," Julia whispered, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the anguish beneath. She reached for his hand, her touch still electric despite the spreading numbness. "I'm so sorry, but you left me no choice." Realization dawned with terrible clarity. The whiskey. She had poisoned him, his wife, the love of his life, the woman for whom he would have torn apart heaven and earth. She had betrayed him in the most intimate way possible. "Why?" he managed, the single syllable laden with hurt that transcended the physical symptoms rapidly overtaking him. Julia knelt before him, taking his increasingly unresponsive hands in hers. "Because I love you," she said, her voice steady despite the tears welling in her eyes. "Because I've seen what waits beyond death." Because I've lived it, Elias. The suffering, the torment, the knowledge that everything you did in life has consequences beyond what we ever imagined. Reed tried to speak, to argue, to plead, but his tongue had grown too heavy. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, each pulse more labored than the last. Julia's face swam before him, beautiful and terrible in its resolve. "You don't understand what you're doing," he whispered, fighting for each word. "I do," she countered, her hands tightening on his. "Better than anyone could. I've been there, Elias. I've experienced what you've condemned thousands to suffer." A tear slipped down her cheek, but her voice remained firm. "And you need to understand it too, to truly comprehend what you've done, what you're still doing, the souls you've sent to torment, the lives you've destroyed." Reed felt himself sliding from the chair, his body no longer responding to his desperate commands. Julia caught him, cradling him against her with surprising strength. Part of him wanted to fight, to call for help, to rage against this final betrayal. But another part, a part he had suppressed since her death, understood with terrible clarity. She pressed her forehead against his, an intimacy they had shared countless times throughout their marriage. "I will bring you back," she promised, her tears falling onto his face, mingling with his own. "I will find a redeemer. I will lead the hunting party myself if necessary. But you need this, Elias. You need to see, to experience, to understand." Reed fought to keep his eyes open, to memorize her face one last time. Even now, dying by her hand, he loved her with an intensity that defied logic, that transcended betrayal itself. His final thought, as life ebbed away, was not of betrayal or anger or fear of what awaited him. It was of her, of Julia's face illuminated by sunlight on their wedding day, of her laughter during stolen moments between crisis briefings, of her steady presence that had once balanced his worst impulses. Julia held him until she felt the final breath leave his body. Only then did she allow the full weight of grief to overwhelm her composure. She wept silently, cradling the man she had loved for 30 years, the man she had just condemned to the torment she herself had endured. "I'll find you," she promised the empty room, her voice barely audible. "I'll bring you home." "Execute," Mercer commanded, and 16 shadow figures converged on the warehouse through rain-slicked darkness. The strike team breached 3 entry points simultaneously, night vision transforming the pitch-black interior into ghostly green terrain. Mercer entered last, weapon raised, scanning for targets that thermal imaging had shown moments before. The warehouse floor stretched before them, empty. The hairs on Mercer's neck stood up one heartbeat before brilliant floodlights blazed from above, blinding the team through night vision gear. Agonized screams filled the comms as operators clawed at their faces. "Ambush!" Mercer ripped off his goggles, vision swimming with after-images as gunfire erupted from metal catwalks above. Barrett's people had been waiting, positioned in the rafters, behind stacked crates, on overhead walkways. Not 50 huddled refugees, but 24 hardened fighters with perfect firing positions. The kill zone was brutally simple and inescapable. 3 operators dropped in the first volley, throats and faces exploding in crimson sprays. Another 4 died trying to return fire, cut down by coordinated crossfire from elevated positions. Mercer's second-in-command managed 2 steps toward cover before bullets punched through his spine, dropping him like a marionette with cut strings. "Regroup at the east!" Mercer's order died as a bullet shattered his comm unit, another tearing through his shoulder with white-hot intensity. He dove behind a concrete pillar, the only cover in the killing field his team had walked into. 8 seconds, and 12 of his elite operators lay dead or dying. Concentrated fire pinned down the survivors, methodically eliminating them one by one. A round punched through Mercer's thigh, another tore through his side, spinning him onto the blood-slick concrete. His hand came away crimson, warm blood pulsing between fingers with each heartbeat. The gunfire stopped abruptly. Barrett emerged from shadow, flanked by Wayland. His expression showed no triumph, only cold efficiency. The missing fingers on his hand visible on the grip of his pistol. "Who tipped you off?" Mercer gasped, blood bubbling between clenched teeth as he struggled to raise his sidearm. Barrett kicked the weapon away, then pressed his boot against Mercer's wound. "Someone you overlooked, Julia Reed." The name hit harder than bullets. "Bitch!" Mercer spat blood onto the concrete. "President's already dead," Barrett said, crouching to place his pistol against Mercer's forehead. "See you soon, old friend," Barrett said quietly. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse, silencing the last defender of a regime already fallen. A sharp knock echoed through the presidential suite. Julia Reed opened the door, eyes red-rimmed and swollen, tear tracks glistening on her cheeks. She clutched a handkerchief in trembling fingers, her composure shattered. "Ma'am," the larger of the two enforcers said, his voice faltering at her appearance. "We've brought Dr. Gray as the president ordered." Between them stood Gray, hands bound with polymer restraints, face bruised but defiant. His eyes widened at Julia's devastated expression. "Please come in," she whispered, stepping aside. The enforcers hesitated on the threshold, exchanging glances before marching their prisoner into the office. They froze 3 steps in. President Reed lay sprawled on the antique carpet, blood pooling beneath his head, soaking into the presidential seal embroidered in gold thread. His ornate ceremonial sidearm rested beside his outstretched hand. The bullet hole at his temple appeared small, almost precise, against skin already growing pallid. "Jesus Christ," the first enforcer breathed. "I just found him this way," Julia said, voice cracking. "I'd stepped out to give him privacy before your arrival. When I returned..." She gestured helplessly at her husband's body. Dr. Gray stared at the fallen president, expression unreadable. "The stress of everything," Julia continued, dabbing at fresh tears. "This tearing between worlds, the returnees appearing everywhere, and the betrayal by those he trusted most." Her gaze flickered meaningfully to Gray. "Should we call for medical assistance?" the second enforcer asked, though his tone acknowledged the futility. "It's too late," she replied. "He's been gone at least 20 minutes. The enforcers stood awkwardly, trained for violence, but unprepared for this tableau of political catastrophe. Their prisoner forgotten momentarily as protocols collapsed around them. "What about him?" the first enforcer finally asked, jerking his chin toward Gray. "What should we do with the prisoner?" Julia straightened, something shifting behind her grief-stricken expression. "You might want to start by releasing him and apologizing," she said quietly. "He is likely your new boss." The blood drained from both men's faces as implications cascaded through their understanding. Their eyes met in a moment of shared, panicked recognition. Soldiers suddenly on the wrong side of power. Gray's gaze shifted from the dead president to Julia, a silent exchange passing between them that the enforcers couldn't decipher but instinctively feared. The balance of power had shifted, and they stood on quicksand.